It's Tuesday, July 8th, 2025, and we have two separate slight risks of severe weather. One out here will be situated on top of central Oklahoma, then our other one will be out here in the mid-Atlantic. And then both of these will be surrounded with a respective marginal risk of severe weather. Our one up here in the mid-Atlantic will extend up into New England and then down into the Carolinas. And our central Oklahoma risk will expand all the way out into the Mississippi River Valley and Midwest, and then all the way out into the upper southern plains. Once again, our main risk for today is going to be severe winds. We have a 15% risk of severe winds out here in central Oklahoma, then another 15% risk of severe winds out here in the mid-Atlantic. And both of these are going to be surrounded by a conditional 5% risk of severe winds, which any storm in these areas. Now, I do think we could see our 15% risk of severe winds out here in the southern plains extended a bit more westward up into the Texas panhandle and possibly a bit northward into Kansas. And in both of our 15% risk areas, I think gusts up to 70 miles an hour could be possible. Then our 5% risk areas, I think anywhere within them, there could be some isolated gust exceeding 60 miles an hour. And our hail risk is going to be pretty much completely isolated to the upper central and southern plains, and it's only going to be a 5% risk of hail. So some small hail, not really exceeding 1 inch in diameter, will be expected in this area. And the Storm Prediction Center has gone ahead and not issued a tornado risk for anywhere, but I do think there is an interesting area of tornado potential up here in the upper Michigan Peninsula in northern Wisconsin, which we will talk about more in a minute. In our excessive rainfall outlook, which is a pretty good indicator of where flooding will be, will not include central Texas for the first time since the Thursday before 4th of July, but it will include a couple of slight risk up here, which would entail some areas receiving anywhere between 2 to 4 inches of rain. One up here in southeastern Oklahoma and western Arkansas, then another one up here, which spans from the mid-Atlantic to the northeastern coast of the United States. And then just a large general area, which could see anywhere between 1 to 2 inches of rain and possibly some isolated pockets of 3 inches of rain, highlighted by that marginal risk. Here's a more visual look on what areas will receive the most precipitation today. And immediately we can see a couple of hot spots. One here near the DFW metro, which I'm surprised is actually not highlighted in that flood risk, with some areas receiving anywhere between 4 to 6 inches of rain in that pocket. And then up here in eastern Oklahoma and western Arkansas, which could expect to see large swaths of anywhere between 2 to 4 inches of rain. And although central Texas is not highlighted, it is definitely possible that they could receive anywhere between 1 to 2 inches of rain today. But our mid-Atlantic risk area will receive some rain with some swaths exceeding 2 inches, particularly here in eastern Maryland. And this will occur from the remnants of Tropical Storm Chantal in the early morning hours, but our main rain is going to come later in the afternoon as that front in line of storms passes through, which could see a lot of isolated areas receiving anywhere between 2 to 4 inches of rain and a large area receiving anywhere between 1 and 2 inches of rain, and our slight risk of excessive rainfall up here, which spans from the mid-Atlantic to the northeast. Then I just mentioned the remnants of Tropical Storm Chantal bringing a lot of rain to this region today, and it appears that today will be the last time it will impact the U.S. in any way before it moves out into the Atlantic and will be gone forever. And some good news is that there's actually no immediate concern of any development out here in the Atlantic at all. Here's a simulated reflectivity from our Southern Plains risk area today, and we're going to look for storm initiation around mid to late afternoon. We're going to see a couple of storm clusters out here in the upper plains in eastern New Mexico, which could become organized because of a high pressure system providing organizational shear back out to the northwest, and these storms would pose possibly a severe wind and hail threat. And then the threat of a couple of organized storms along the I-20 corridor could be realized along a outflow boundary in the early to mid-afternoon, and these would also be a entirely wind and possibly some small hail. But by this time is when our main area of storms is expected to fire up here in southern Kansas and back into the Midwest and Mississippi River Valley. And these storms are going to be initiated by some frontal activity up here and possibly a low pressure system situated somewhere in Missouri. Now, the area of largest concern would be out here in Oklahoma and the Texas Panhandle today. But as we can see, storm coverage is going to be a little spotty with a couple of organized cells here and there, which would bring that wind and hail threat. But because our large-scale forcing from our troughing is going to be so weak, it appears that the largest area of storm coverage will be out here in the Oklahoma and Texas Panhandle, where there will be a low-pressure system along a very weak dry line and then our stationary front. And these storms would actually initiate fairly late with the help of that low-level jet. And in their early stages, they'll bring a mostly wind and hail threat with even the possibility of a weak spin up tornado, although the threat of that is going to be very low. But eventually in the early night hours, this will actually turn into a bit of a mesoscale convective system, which would be possibly capable of producing some gust up to 70 miles an hour. And this would exist up here in the Texas Panhandle all the way into Wednesday morning. A better look at our Midwest risk areas shows that some of our ingredients are going to be laid Monday night by a couple of decaying mesoscale convective systems. And it looks like they're slated to redevelop in the afternoon today, possibly bringing some severe winds and even the very, very small threat of a weak spin-up tornado. And that's going to be because there's a low pressure system and these storms are going to be interacting with a boundary with an area of a lot of 3 Cape. So that definitely can't be ruled out. But the main threat with these storms would be some isolated risk of severe winds. And as they move farther away from that boundary, they're likely to become a lot more disorganized as there's not a lot of organizational shear out here. And then up here in the Michigan Peninsula is where I do think we could actually see a bit of a small tornado threat with a couple of discrete cells that are expected to fire up here along a low pressure system and likely a boundary. And then this would occur in the early afternoon hours. So definitely something to be aware of up here. Then the last area of concern is going to be our mid-Atlantic all the way up to northeastern coast risk area, where it looks like storms will fire along some frontal activity and a low pressure system up here in eastern Pennsylvania right after lunchtime in the early afternoon, with the most organized storms being closer to our lower pressure system. And these storms will provide mostly a severe wind threat to this region, but I actually wouldn't rule out possibly a weak spin-up tornado in the early stages of these storms when they're more discrete. But again, the main threat with these storms would be severe gusts in excess of 60 miles an hour. And it looks like the threat with this will persist until these storms move out into the Atlantic around sunset, with an isolated area of possibly some re-intensification with that low-level jet, possibly down here in the Chesapeake region. But after that, and it turns to nightfall, it looks like the risk with these storms would be mostly over. Here are 500 millibar winds, and this will show us where some of our large-scale forcing for storms will be. And one of the culprits out here in our mid-Atlantic and northeastern risk area is going to be the short wave moving through the region. But in our main risk area, we see this high-pressure system, which is going to squeeze some air from this trough up here in the northern Midwest, which will provide some forcing for storms and some organizational shear for storms, although that forcing is expected to be pretty weak. So that is why storm coverage out here isn't really super certain and isn't expected to be super large. Here's a weather sounding from our Southern Plains risk area, and we see in our photograph we have a little bit of curving in the lower layers before it extends out. Our low level helicity and low level shear are going to be both very low. Then our organizational shear is also going to be low. So organized storms isn't really a super big possibility out here. And this would also decrease that threat of some hail. We do have some interesting veering in our winds, but it's very weak and it likely wouldn't be enough to organize these storms. Our lowest cloud level is going to be higher, which would be indicative of a mostly severe wind threat. Our low level lapse rates are going to be pretty high, which would also be indicative of a severe wind threat. Our mid-level lapse rates are decent, and we do have a bit of cape up here near our freezing layer. So that is the reason for that conditional hail risk. Although our bulk shear is pretty low, we do have a decent bit of drier aloft, which would also support that threat for severe winds. And our dew points are going to be pretty high, so a very moist environment, which would support storms out here. We also have a very unstable environment at around 3,500 joules per kilogram of cape. So that's also going to be very conducive for severe storms. Our precipitable water is going to be 1.52, and that's going to be coupled with a downdraft cape of 1,600. Then our relative humidity is around 50%, so that could help with evaporative cooling. Then our 3 cape is going to be 86. So all these things would probably support the threat of severe winds, possibly even gusting up to 70 miles an hour with any organized storm clusters out here. This is weather sounding from our mid-Atlantic to northeastern risk area, and our photograph doesn't look super special. Our low-level helicity is going to be pretty poor. Our low-level shear is going to be pretty poor, and our organizational shear is also going to be pretty poor, and that's going to be coupled with a lack of wind veering. So organized storms aren't really going to be much of a possibility out here, and they're really going to rely on that frontal activity and that low pressure system to keep that going. Our mid-level lapse rates are going to be poor, along with a decent bit of cape up here near our freezing layer, but our freezing layer is going to be pretty high, and because our lapse rates and our organizational shear is so low, that is a reason why hail is pretty much not expected out here at all today. Our low lapse rates are going to be conducive of a severe wind threat. Then we have a very moist environment, which would possibly support strong storms for longer. Now, our lowest cloud level is going to be low enough to support possibly a weak spin-up tornado threat at the area closest to that low pressure system. And our atmosphere is going to be very juiced up at around 4,000 joules per kilogram of CAPE, so very conducive for severe storms. And our precipitable water is going to be really high at 2.35 inches, which is one of the reasons why severe winds could be bolstered. And then a lot of rainfall is also expected for this region up here in the mid-Atlantic to northeast. Then our 3 CAPE is going to be very high at 158, which is another reason why I think the threat of possibly a weak spin-up tornado isn't zero. And then this would also support that threat for some strong severe winds. Here's a weather sounding with that possibly organized area of storms out here in Missouri. Our hodograph doesn't look special. Our low level shear is going to be poor. Our low level velocity is going to be poor. And then our organizing shear is also going to be pretty bad at below 20 knots. There's also going to be no wind veering, which will also mean storms aren't really going to be able to get organized. We have a decent bit of CAPE up here near our freezing layer, but our mid-level lapse rates are going to be so low, and our organizational shear is going to be so low that that threat of hail is going to be pretty much zero. Our low-level lapse rates aren't going to be bad, which would support that threat for some isolated severe winds out here. And our moisture is going to be pretty solid with a 72 dew point, so very conducive for storms. And our atmosphere is going to be juiced up at here as well at around 3,400 joules per kilogram of CAPE, so very conducive of severe weather. Our precipitable water is going to be 1.7 inches, and our downdraft CAPE is going to be 1,100. And then our 3 CAPE is going to be 200, which would support that threat of some strong severe winds out here possibly. Then because our 3 CAPE is going to be so high, our LCL is going to be low enough to possibly support a spin-up tornado threat. And because these storms are going to be near a low pressure system and interacting with a boundary, I would not outlaw that threat, possibly a weak spin-up tornado out here in Missouri today. But that main threat would be some isolated severe gust in excess of 60 miles an hour. Our last weather sounding is going to be from our interesting area with some tornado potential up here in the Michigan Peninsula in northern Wisconsin. We see a fairly straight hodograph, but we do see a teensy curve in our lower levels. And this is going to be indicative of some good organizational shear, so some possibly organized discrete storms out here. And then our low level helicity is going to be pretty okay, and our low level shear is not going to be super great, but closer to that low pressure system and assumed front that would be there, that would likely become more conducive for tornadoes. We also see some wind veering, which would be conducive of some more organized storms. And although our lapse rates are going to be pretty poor, we do have a decent bit of CAPE near our freezing layer, and because there are expected to be some discrete organized storms, I definitely think some hail up here could be possible. We do have enough moisture to support that threat for some strong storms. Then our low level lapse rates are going to be pretty solid, which could possibly support that threat of a tornado and some severe winds. Our lowest cloud level is also going to be enough to support that tornado threat. Our atmosphere is going to be somewhat juiced up at 2,000 joules per kilogram of CAPE, so definitely enough to support a threat of severe weather. Our precipitable water isn't going to be super high either at 1.12, so likely some updraft dominant storms, and then that threat for severe winds could also be there as well. Then our 3 CAPE is going to be 186, which would support that threat of possibly a weak tornado and some severe winds. So with a couple of organized discrete cells up here, likely in northern Wisconsin in the upper Michigan Peninsula, and then a decent bit of 3 CAPE near that low pressure system and assumed boundaries, I definitely think this is an area where we could see a tornado or two and some severe winds in excess of 60 miles an hour.